In the village of Intercourse, Pennsylvania, there is a woman who turned 81 last spring. A neighbor photographed her at the community gathering, standing in the afternoon light without shade or filter, and when that photograph circulated among a small group of researchers studying rural aging patterns, one of them wrote in her notes, "This face does not match this birth year. No procedures, no prescriptions, no clinic visits." The woman had spent 81 years outdoors working, and her skin still held to her bones. That is the question this video is going to answer. Not with promises, with a record. The Amish communities of Lancaster County have some of the lowest rates of age-related facial sagging documented in any studied American population. Researchers from the University of Pittsburgh who conducted rural health surveys in the mid-2000s noted the unusual structural integrity of skin among older Amish women who had spent their lives in direct sun, in cold winters, in kitchens filled with wood smoke. By every external variable that modern dermatology uses to predict accelerated aging, these women should look older than they do. They do not. And the reason is not genetics. The research ruled that out early. What the research found was a daily practice, a 3-minute ritual done morning and evening, rooted in materials they have always had and never abandoned simply because the market told them something better had arrived. Because the market never arrived at their door. Before I go further, I want to be precise about the source of what I am describing. The methods in this video are inspired by traditional practices of Old Order Amish communities in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, and Holmes County, Ohio. These are not reconstructions or folklore guesses. They are practices still in daily use. Now, to understand why this matters to you specifically, we need to go backward first. Because the reason you have never heard of this ritual is not an accident. In 1938, the United States passed the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act. That law gave the FDA authority over drugs and food. But cosmetics received almost no meaningful regulatory framework. A company could put a substance on your face and call it skincare, and the FDA had almost no mechanism to require safety testing before it hit shelves. That was the foundation. For the next 84 years, that foundation did not substantially change. Not in 1960, not in 1980, not after women began reporting reactions, hormonal disruption, contact dermatitis, and accelerated skin breakdown from products they had been told were premium anti-aging solutions. The regulatory wall did not move. In 1976, the cosmetic industry created its own internal review panel, called the Cosmetic Ingredient Review. The panel has evaluated over 4,000 ingredients. Here is what it cannot do: issue enforceable rulings. It is funded by the Personal Care Products Council, which is the industry's own trade association. A panel funded by the industry reviewing the industry's ingredients with no power to remove anything from the market. That is not a safety system. That is paperwork with a budget. And underneath all of it, a labeling rule that most women have never been told about. When you read the word fragrance on a skincare label, that single word can legally conceal hundreds of individual chemical compounds. The European Union identified this as a consumer safety problem and moved against it in 2003. The United States did not follow. Fragrance remains a closed door on American labels, and behind that door, your skin has been absorbing compounds you were never given the right to know about. The industry did not drift into this situation carelessly. It built it, and into that regulatory vacuum, it sold you retinol concentrations calibrated to show just enough improvement to justify repurchase. Peptide complexes priced at $180 for 30 milliliters, and anti-aging serums that address the symptoms of a skin barrier already damaged, in some cases damaged by earlier products from the same company. Meanwhile, in Lancaster County, women were doing something else entirely. The core of the Amish facial practice is not exotic. That is the first thing that will surprise you. There is no rare botanical parent, no ancient oil flown in from somewhere. The materials are so ordinary that they have been systematically underestimated by an industry that profits only when you believe ordinary is not enough. The ritual begins with tallow, rendered beef fat, specifically from grass-fed animals, a byproduct of the same cattle kept for farming. Tallow has a fatty acid profile, meaning the ratio of fats it contains that is closer to human sebum than almost any plant-derived oil. Sebum is the oil your own skin produces. When you apply something structurally similar to what your skin already makes, it does not trigger the same inflammatory response that foreign compounds can. It absorbs without resistance. It does not sit on top. It participates. The specific fatty acids in tallow, palmitic, stearic, oleic, linoleic are the same fatty acids that form the outer layer of human skin cells. Your skin recognizes this. It has always recognized this. The industry told you it was old-fashioned. It is old-fashioned in the same way that eating is old-fashioned. After cleansing the face with water and, in some households, a small amount of raw apple cider vinegar diluted significantly, not applied straight, diluted, the tallow is warmed between the palms and pressed into the skin in 3 minutes or less. Not rubbed, pressed. The warmth matters, the pressure matters, the brevity is part of it. Longer does not mean better. Here's the number that changes everything. In a 2007 comparison published by a European dermatology working group studying traditional versus commercial lipid-based moisturizers, tallow-based preparations produced a measurable improvement in transepidermal water loss, the rate at which your skin loses moisture to the environment, comparable to ceramide-rich clinical formulations, costing 40 to 60 times more per gram. 40 to 60 times. The skin does not know the price, it only knows the molecule. I want to introduce you to someone before we go any further into the ritual itself. A retired school teacher from Wooster, Ohio, 67 years old with 4 children and 11 grandchildren. She started using rendered tallow on her face at 62 after a pharmacist's granddaughter she met at a farmer's market explained the practice to her. Before that, she had spent approximately $90 a month on a rotating collection of department store anti-aging creams, none of which she could use without some degree of redness or tightness. She now spends under $4 a month. What she said standing in the parking lot of that farmer's market was this: I kept waiting for the catch. There was no catch. My skin just stopped being angry. 5 years later, the women in her church group ask her what she is doing differently. The second element of the ritual is less about application and more about restraint. What Amish women do not do in the morning is as important as what they do. They do not layer. They do not apply a toner, then a serum, then a moisturizer, then an SPF, then a primer. The modern multi-step morning routine marketed to you as sophistication subjects your skin to a sequence of pH shifts, emulsifier contacts, and synthetic compound exposures before 7 in the morning. The skin barrier, which took your body years to build and which becomes more fragile after menopause as estrogen declines, does not benefit from being processed. It benefits from being left mostly alone, with one well-chosen addition. That restraint is the part of the ritual that modern culture has made almost impossible to accept, because restraint cannot be packaged. It cannot be sold. It produces no revenue. And so the industry spent decades teaching you that more steps meant more results, when the evidence increasingly suggests the opposite. Now, I have to tell you something honest, because this channel does not exist to sell you a different kind of fantasy. Tallow application will not reverse advanced. Structural sagging caused by significant collagen loss over decades. If you are looking at deep nasolabial folds that developed over 20 years of sun exposure without protection, no topical application, commercial or traditional, is going to lift those. What tallow can do is stop the ongoing damage to the skin barrier that makes sagging progress faster. It can restore suppleness to skin that has become tight and papery from years of harsh cleansers and overprocessed product contact. It can improve the texture and tone of skin that has been chronically dehydrated at the lipid level. Prevention and restoration of function are real. Structural reversal of advanced aging is not something any topical does reliably, and I will not tell you otherwise. What the Amish practice offers is a ceiling on how fast the clock moves, not a reversal, a slowing that is still worth a great deal. The practice also extends to limited sun exposure management, not avoidance, but timing. Working in the early morning and late afternoon, covering the face and neck during peak hours with lightweight fabric, not because of a modern understanding of UV radiation, but because generations of practical observation produced the same conclusion the science later confirmed. The skin protected during peak hours shows less structural breakdown over time. The method preceded the mechanism by 100 years. What is remarkable about this ritual is that it did not originate in Lancaster County. The Amish preserved it. They did not invent it. Roman physicians in the 1st century documented the use of animal-derived fats on the skin for both medicinal and cosmetic purposes, specifically for maintaining skin suppleness in dry climates. Egyptian cosmetic records, some dating back over 3,000 years, reference lipid-based face preparations used by women of status to preserve skin appearance across decades of desert exposure. In Japan, the use of minimalist, barrier-focused skincare rice bran applied and removed very little else produced results that led Western dermatologists studying Japanese women's aging patterns in the 1990s to formally question whether their own assumptions about aging and skincare complexity were simply wrong. Korean Hanbok tradition, with its emphasis on fermented compounds and minimal intervention, reaches the same destination from a different direction. Ayurvedic texts from ancient India formalize the principle of like nourishes like, that the skin responds best to substances structurally similar to itself centuries before Western biochemistry had the tools to explain why. The Amish did not discover this. They simply never let it be replaced. That is the distinction. Not invention, preservation. In a culture that made a deliberate decision to stop accepting every new thing the outside world offered, the old knowledge stayed intact. And now, 100 years after the modern cosmetic industry began convincing American women that tradition was backwardness, the data is beginning to agree with the grandmothers. The 3-minute ritual is this: clean water, minimal or no soap on the face, a small amount of diluted raw apple cider vinegar as a toner, no more than 2 or 3 times a week, a pea-sized amount of rendered grass-fed tallow warmed between the palms and pressed into damp skin, and then nothing else. Morning and evening, every day, for months before you judge it, because the skin barrier does not rebuild in a week. That is it. That is what was buried. Not buried in complexity, buried in its own simplicity, which an industry built on complexity could not afford to let you trust. If there is a woman in your life who spent her 70s looking more like her 50s, and you always assumed it was luck or genetics, consider the other possibility. Consider that she knew something, or was close to someone who knew something, and that knowledge moved quietly through the ordinary gestures of daily life, the way she washed her face, the small tin she kept on the bathroom shelf, without ever being called a ritual, because to her it was just what you did. What was the last thing a woman in your family did for her skin that you watched but never tried? Leave that answer in the comments. Not the product she bought, the thing she actually did. And if your mother or your grandmother had a particular way she cared for her face that you have been trying to remember, or that you watched as a child and only now are wondering about, write that down too. Those details matter more than you might think, and this community is the right place for them. If you are the kind of woman who believes that real knowledge has been quietly pushed aside to protect someone else's profit, you already know what to do. The next video addresses something even more specific: why the skin around the eyes ages at a different rate in Amish women than the rest of the face, and what a regulatory decision made in 1972 by a committee most Americans have never heard of, quietly removed from American skincare formulations the very compound that was keeping that area intact.